We can't just hand out that kind of money to anyone who walks in off the street." The words sliced through the quiet murmur of Summit National Bank's flagship branch in downtown Atlanta. Amanda Blake, the branch manager, stood stiffly behind the counter, her tone cold, each syllable laced with the unmistakable sharpness of condescension. Camille Harris, dressed in a simple navy cardigan and tan slacks, stood on the opposite side of the polished marble counter. Her silver hair was neatly pulled back, her posture graceful, and her brown eyes calm, yet alert. She had approached the teller window like any ordinary customer. No entourage, no expensive handbag or designer shoes to signal affluence. Just an elderly black woman carrying a well-worn leather purse and a folded withdrawal slip. She had asked for $95 from her personal account. Now, the bank manager's voice carried easily across the high-ceilinged lobby. Several customers paused mid-transaction, glancing over with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Two younger tellers, standing nearby, exchanged a look and smirked. "Did you hear that?" whispered Emily Ross, a junior teller barely out of college. 95 grand. She's got to be joking. She probably found someone's checkbook. Scott Miller, the assistant branch manager, muttered under his breath. Chuckling, he stood a few feet behind Amanda, arms crossed tightly over his chest, watching the scene unfold with a look of both amusement and superiority. Camille remained silent. She didn't flinch. She didn't protest. She had stood through worse in her lifetime. "Ma'am," Amanda continued, now with that particular kind of corporate smile that wasn't really a smile at all. "Even if you claim to have that amount, we require substantial verification for such large cash withdrawals. It's for your protection." "Of course," she gestured to the modest withdrawal slip. "And frankly, you should have made an appointment. This kind of request disrupts branch operations." Camille calmly slid her Georgia State ID and her Summit National Bank debit card across the counter. "All the required identification is provided, and I'm aware of my withdrawal limits." Amanda barely glanced at the ID before passing it back as though it were contaminated. Her eyes roamed Camille's face, taking in every line of age, every wrinkle. Every detail she clearly believed confirmed her bias. "I'm afraid this isn't something we can process today." "Why not?" Camille asked, her voice soft yet steady. "Because," Amanda said sharply, lowering her voice just enough to suggest secrecy while ensuring those nearby could still hear. "We have had issues with certain accounts lately. We can't authorize large withdrawals without verifying the legitimacy of the funds." "Legitimacy," Camille repeated, her brow slightly raised. "Yes," Scott cut in, stepping forward. "Given the circumstances, we have to be extra cautious. We've seen fraudulent activity." "Fraud," Camille's voice remained even. "Ma'am, please don't take offense," Amanda interrupted quickly, though her tone suggested quite the opposite. "But for someone withdrawing this kind of money, you should expect extra scrutiny. You understand?" Camille said nothing. "If you truly have that much," Emily added quietly, not bothering to hide the sarcasm in her tone, "maybe consider wiring the funds. That's what our high net worth clients do. They don't just walk in asking for piles of cash." A soft ripple of laughter passed among the staff standing nearby. Even a few customers smirked. "She doesn't look like she has that kind of money anyway," someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. Camille glanced around the lobby. The reactions were the same as she had seen countless times before. Dismissal, doubt, disdain. A young couple seated by the waiting area openly stared at her. A man in a business suit shook his head as if embarrassed for her. "Perhaps," Amanda suggested, voice dripping with false politeness, "you might try the community credit union a few blocks over. They're more accustomed to alternative banking needs." Camille inhaled slowly, then exhaled. Alternative needs. Well, for customers without high balance accounts or business profiles. Amanda's smile tightened. They have flexible services for individuals in transitional financial situations. In other words, Scott added, his smirk returning, people who don't typically manage amounts like this. Camille looked down at her withdrawal slip, then back at Amanda and Scott. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. I will wait, she said simply. You may verify whatever you feel necessary. I have provided all that is required. Amanda's eyes narrowed. She turned to Emily. Pull up the account history. Yes, ma'am. Emily tapped rapidly on her terminal, then paused, her expression shifting from smugness to something closer to surprise. What is it? Amanda asked impatiently. The balance, Emily began, but Scott leaned over, pressing a key to block the screen from Camille's view. Irrelevant, he said quickly. There's still procedure. I'll notify security. That won't be necessary, Camille replied calmly. But Scott was already picking up the phone. Across the lobby, a security guard stirred from his station near the entrance. His hand moved toward the radio on his belt. We have procedures for situations like this, Amanda said, as though reassuring Camille. For everyone's safety. The irony was overwhelming. Camille, whose funds sustained this very branch's operations, was now being treated like a potential criminal. Customers were now openly watching. Whispers filled the air. Some faces showed amusement, others discomfort, but no one intervened. Camille stood motionless. This won't take long, Amanda said, her voice soft but unmistakably final. If there's nothing suspicious, we'll let you know. Camille glanced upward toward the discreet security camera mounted above the teller stations. Yes, she murmured to herself. You certainly will. As Camille stood in the lobby of Summit National Bank, the murmurs of doubt and the smirks of the staff triggered a familiar ache deep in her chest, not of fear or humiliation, but memory. These faces, these attitudes, she had seen them before, 40 years earlier. The same building had looked remarkably different. The marble floors were duller then, the ceilings lower, the furniture plain. Back in those days, Camille wasn't standing across the counter. She was the one cleaning behind it. At just 25, Camille had taken a job as a nighttime janitor at Summit National. She had recently moved to Atlanta with little more than a suitcase and a high school diploma from a small town in Alabama. Her mother had worked 2 jobs cleaning houses. Her father had died young, leaving behind a legacy of honesty and hard work, but little else. Camille promised herself she would build something greater. Those early years were exhausting. She cleaned offices after business hours, scrubbing desks and emptying trash cans for people who rarely looked her in the eye during the day. But Camille noticed things others didn't. She watched how the tellers handled customers. She listened to the language managers used in meetings when they thought no one was paying attention. She memorized financial terms from the documents left on desks during her breaks. She sat in the employee lounge with a worn-out notebook, jotting down unfamiliar phrases, prime lending rate, equity, loan-to-value ratio, words that felt like keys to locked doors. One evening, as she wiped fingerprints from a glass partition, she overheard 2 managers discussing a teller position opening. The next morning, still wearing her janitor's uniform, Camille walked into the Human Resources office and asked how to apply. The woman behind the desk blinked in surprise, then smiled politely. Oh, honey, that's a daytime role for people with experience. I'm willing to learn, Camille replied. She was offered a probationary role as a teller trainee, an opportunity many assumed she would soon fail. But Camille studied tirelessly. She enrolled in night classes at Atlanta Community College. balancing coursework with full-time hours at the bank. She faced constant doubt from both colleagues and customers. "Are you sure you can handle this, dear?" became a phrase she heard more than she cared to remember. Yet she excelled. Within 2 years, she was promoted to full teller. By her 30s, she had become a loan officer, despite resistance from a supervisor who candidly told her, clients might feel more comfortable with someone else handling their applications. She smiled through the insult, knowing full well that competence would outshine prejudice in the long run. Her reputation grew. Camille became known not just for her knowledge of finance, but for her ability to turn struggling client accounts into success stories. When homeowners feared foreclosure, Camille found creative refinancing solutions. When small businesses struggled, she helped secure growth capital that kept their doors open, but advancement was never smooth. During a review for a branch manager role, an executive once asked, "Do you think customers will respect leadership from someone like you?" The question wasn't about experience. It was about skin color and gender barriers that had loomed over every step of her journey. Camille responded by continuing to outperform every metric set before her. In her 40s, she earned her bachelor's degree in business administration. Followed by an MBA from Georgia State University, she attended leadership seminars, often the only black woman and sometimes the oldest participant in the room. By her 50s, Camille had become regional director, overseeing multiple branches across Georgia. Each location she managed saw increased profitability and, more importantly to her, higher customer satisfaction ratings across all demographics. She implemented training programs that emphasized equitable service. She mentored younger employees from diverse backgrounds, ensuring they had the guidance she once lacked 5 years ago. When Summit National's long-standing CEO retired, Camille was named Chief Operations Officer, a position many whispered would be the ceiling for someone like her. "She's great at operations," they said. "But CEO, that's a public-facing role." The message was clear. Her qualifications were undeniable. But her appearance, her age, and her background were still viewed by some as obstacles. Yet the board couldn't ignore her results. 3 months ago, after a tight and often contentious board vote, Camille Harris became the first black woman and the oldest executive in Summit's history to be named CEO. During her acceptance speech, she had stood at the podium in this very building and declared, "Every customer, every employee, and every community we serve will experience the same level of respect and excellence, no exceptions." It wasn't just a promise. It was a vow rooted in decades of first-hand experience. Camille understood that real change couldn't be delegated. It had to be led from the front, observed, and enforced. That was why, today, she wore no designer suit, no entourage, no corporate badge, just a navy cardigan, tan slacks, and the quiet authority of someone who had earned her place through grit and grace. Now, as she stood before Amanda Blake and Scott Miller, two people who saw only her age and appearance, Camille reflected on the long road she had traveled. They had no idea who they were speaking to, and soon, that ignorance would cost them dearly. The uncomfortable silence that filled the bank lobby after Camille's calm refusal to leave seemed to thicken the very air. Amanda Blake straightened behind the counter, her mouth pressed into a thin line as she made a show of typing something urgently on her terminal. Nearby, Scott Miller whispered something to Emily Ross, whose wide-eyed glance toward Camille was a mixture of uncertainty and disdain. The security guard, a young man named Kyle, shifted uneasily at his post near the entrance. His hand hovered near the radio strapped to his belt, clearly awaiting a signal. Camille remained unmoving. She neither fidgeted nor faltered. Instead, she stood with the silent, commanding patience of someone who had endured far worse than condescension in her lifetime. Amanda cleared her throat. breaking the silence. Ma'am, please understand, we have protocols in place for large cash transactions. Given your unusual request and appearance here today, it's necessary for us to verify the source of the funds thoroughly before proceeding. Her words, carefully wrapped in corporate jargon, barely concealed the real message. You don't belong here, and you can't possibly have earned what you're asking for. Camille offered no immediate reply. Instead, she let the weight of the moment stretch, forcing Amanda to confront her own discomfort. Scott stepped forward, taking the opportunity to escalate. "Ma'am," he said in a clipped tone, "for the sake of our other customers, we'll need you to step aside while we complete the necessary verifications. You're holding up the line." Behind Camille, a few customers shifted impatiently. An older man in a sports coat coughed pointedly. A middle-aged woman clutched her purse tighter against her side. Camille calmly turned her head to glance at the waiting area. Her gaze moved over each face, some openly hostile, others averting their eyes. She had seen these faces before at lunch counters, at schools, at boardrooms, different settings. Same dismissive judgment. "I'm not holding up the line," Camille replied smoothly. "I'm waiting for the service every other customer is entitled to without question." Amanda bristled. Her professional mask faltered. "We are simply ensuring the integrity of our financial operations," she snapped, her voice rising slightly. "You must understand the need for caution. Given the current environment." "The environment." Camille tilted her head slightly, her voice still calm but her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Please, enlighten me. What about today's environment justifies treating me differently from the 3 white gentlemen who made similar withdrawals this morning without delay or suspicion?" A visible ripple of tension passed through the staff gathered behind the counter. Emily Ross busied herself with papers that didn't need organizing. Scott's posture stiffened, his jaw tightening. Amanda hesitated, her mouth opening and closing once before she regained her footing. "We can't discuss other customers' transactions. Ma'am, that would be a violation of privacy policies." "Ah," Camille said quietly. "Privacy? Of course. Convenient." The words hung heavy in the air. Amanda signaled subtly to Kyle, the security guard. He approached cautiously, his expression conflicted. "Ma'am," Kyle began, his voice low and uncertain. "I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the counter and wait in the seating area while they verify your account information." "No," Camille answered simply, not moving. "I am a customer of Summit National Bank. I have presented valid identification. I am requesting access to my own funds. I will not be moved aside like a problem to be hidden." The young guard faltered. He looked back at Amanda, who gave a sharp nod. Kyle stepped closer. The moment bristled with tension. Several customers openly pulled out their phones, sensing that something more than a routine banking dispute was unfolding. Amanda leaned over the counter, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You're causing a scene." Camille smiled, but there was no humor in it. "I'm not causing a scene," she said quietly. "You are." Scott, clearly fed up, grabbed the branch's direct line phone and punched in a number. Moments later, another security officer appeared from a back room, an older man with a no-nonsense expression who looked immediately to Amanda for instruction. "Escort her outside," Amanda said, her voice loud enough for half the lobby to hear. "If she refuses to comply, we will have no choice but to involve the authorities." "Authorities," Camille repeated, lifting an eyebrow. "For attempting to withdraw my own money." Amanda smiled tightly. "For disrupting bank operations and refusing lawful instructions from staff." Kyle shifted uncomfortably. The older security guard, whose nameplate read Barnes, looked equally displeased with the situation, but nodded grimly. "This is your last chance, ma'am," Amanda said, her tone dripping with triumph. "Either step aside peacefully, or we will call Atlanta PD to remove you." Still, Camille did not move. Go ahead, she said, folding her hands neatly over her purse. Make your call. Amanda blinked. For a moment, the certainty wavered in her eyes. She hadn't expected this level of quiet defiance. Scott, fueled by the apparent support of Amanda and the backup security, smirked. Probably has a fake ID anyway, he muttered. Not quietly enough. Camille caught it. So did at least a dozen customers within earshot, and something shifted. A few customers who had been pretending not to watch now openly stared, their expressions uneasy. A young black woman holding a toddler narrowed her eyes at Amanda. An elderly white man with a veteran's cap frowned at Scott. Camille reached calmly into her purse and withdrew her phone. She tapped the screen, activating the camera. Amanda's eyes widened. Filming isn't permitted in the bank. Actually? Camille replied smoothly. Your own posted policies state that customers may document interactions they believe violate their rights. Scott lunged forward slightly, as if to block her view. Barnes, the older guard, placed a hand on Scott's arm, stopping him. Let her record, Barnes said under his breath, his voice laced with something dangerously close to sympathy. You're only digging a deeper hole. Amanda flushed with anger. Camille held the phone steady, panning slowly across the room Amanda's furious face, Scott's sneer, Kyle's discomfort, Emily's wide-eyed fear. She captured it all, the customers watching, the tension, the weight of the moment. You can record all you want, Amanda said through gritted teeth, but it won't change the fact that you don't belong here. The words were out before she could stop them. A collective gasp swept through the lobby. Someone dropped a pen. A child cried softly in the background. Camille lowered the phone. That, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the space, is the truth of this moment. Isn't it you don't believe I belong? Not because of a policy, not because of a procedure, but because of who you think I am. Amanda's face turned scarlet. Scott looked away. Emily's hands trembled. The lobby fell into a thick, heavy silence. Is this the way Summit National Bank treats all its long-term customers? Camille asked, turning slightly to address the watching crowd. Or just the ones who don't fit your image of wealth? Several people shifted uncomfortably. A middle-aged black man wearing a postal uniform stepped closer, arms crossed. Clearly siding with Camille, a Latina woman near the waiting area pulled out her own phone and began recording as well. Amanda opened her mouth, but no words came out. Kyle, the younger guard, looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Barnes muttered something into his radio, his gaze never leaving Camille. For the first time since Camille had entered the branch that morning, Amanda Blake looked uncertain, truly uncertain. Camille turned back to the counter, collected her ID and debit card, and carefully placed them into her purse. You should know, she said, her voice still calm but now carrying a razor edge, that everything happening right now is being documented, every refusal, every comment, every action. She paused. And when the consequences arrive, you won't be able to hide behind policies or procedures, only your own choices. Amanda's mouth worked silently. Scott looked ready to bolt. Emily, pale and shaken, sat down behind her teller station. The two security guards simply stood, silent witnesses to a confrontation that had gone far beyond anything they had been trained to handle. Camille took a slow, deliberate breath, letting it fill her chest, letting the weight of all those years, all those memories, all that strength anchor her. She smiled faintly. Then, as if sensing that the moment had reached its zenith, she drew her phone back out and made a call. She spoke clearly, each word designed to echo across the lobby. Yes, she said into the receiver. This is Camille Harris. I'm at the downtown Summit National Branch. There's been a significant incident. I'll need you here immediately. Amanda paled. Scott's smugness drained away. Even Kyle straightened, a flicker of recognition passing over his features. Barnes leaned closer to Kyle and whispered, "You're about to find out exactly who she is." The lobby, frozen in breathless anticipation, waited. The doors to Summit National would not remain closed for much longer, and neither would the truth. The lobby of Summit National Bank had fallen into a tense, watchful hush. Customers remained seated but alert, many still clutching their phones, recording quietly. The staff clustered behind the counters wore expressions ranging from growing concern to barely concealed panic. Camille Harris stood firm. Her phone lowered now, but still in hand. Her calm demeanor had not changed since Amanda Blake had first challenged her right to withdraw her own funds. If anything, Camille seemed more composed than ever, as though she knew exactly how this would unfold. Amanda, however, no longer carried the same confidence. Her lips pressed into a tight line as she tapped furiously at her computer screen, pretending to review policies she already knew by heart. Her eyes darted toward Scott Miller, whose earlier bravado had all but vanished. Emily Ross sat frozen, pale as a sheet, hands clutching the edge of her teller station. "Who exactly did she call?" Scott whispered. "Probably bluffing," Amanda muttered, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "People like her always try to throw around important names. It's intimidation, nothing more." At that moment, the front doors opened with a soft chime that seemed unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. 3 figures entered the lobby. The first was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a Navy security uniform that bore the Summit National crest, but with distinct gold trim, a senior security officer. His sharp eyes immediately scanned the scene. Behind him walked 2 women. One wore a fitted gray suit, sleek heels clicking against the marble floor. Her strawberry blonde hair was swept into an elegant bun. The other woman, older, in a dark green blazer and black slacks, had an authoritative air that silenced the murmuring crowd even before she spoke. It was Linda McCarthy, Chief Operating Officer of Summit National Bank. Amanda's breath caught in her throat. Scott's face blanched. That's Linda McCarthy," Emily whispered hoarsely. Linda's gaze swept the room, not hurried, not uncertain assessing, like a general entering a battlefield already knowing who had won and who had lost. "Ms. Harris," Linda said, her voice clear and steady, nodding respectfully toward Camille. "I came as soon as I received your call." If Amanda had any lingering hope that Camille had merely invoked Linda's name as a bluff, it vanished instantly. Customers leaned forward in their seats. Phones remained raised. Even Kyle, the younger security guard, and Barnes, the elder, stood at attention. "Miss McCarthy," Camille replied politely, with the quiet dignity that had never left her throughout the ordeal. Linda turned sharply toward Amanda and Scott. "Would someone like to explain what's going on here?" she asked. Amanda fumbled for words. There was a large withdrawal request, and certain procedures had to be followed. "And procedures?" Linda cut in. "Are you referring to the ones that require mocking, stalling, and publicly humiliating a customer in front of an entire branch?" Amanda's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Linda gestured toward the senior security officer. "Mr. Collins, please pull the security footage from the past 90 minutes. Full audio and video. I want it streaming directly to the executive review board upstairs." "Already done, ma'am," Collins replied. "They've been watching for the past 20 minutes. Amanda swayed slightly where she stood. Scott looked toward the exits, as though weighing the possibility of escape, but Linda wasn't finished. "Do you know who this woman is?" Linda demanded, her voice growing sharper. Amanda nodded weakly. "A customer." "Not just any customer." Linda raised her voice so that every employee and customer could hear. This is Camille Harris, President and Chief Executive Officer of Summit National Bank. The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed across the lobby. Several customers who had been recording audibly sucked in breath. Even those who hadn't been paying much attention now stared in wide-eyed shock. Emily Ross dropped her stack of deposit slips. They scattered like leaves across the counter and floor. Amanda's knees buckled slightly, and she gripped the edge of the counter for support. "That's not possible," Scott whispered. She doesn't... Doesn't what? Linda's gaze snapped to him. Doesn't look like a CEO? Doesn't fit your assumption of who belongs in leadership? Is that what you were going to say? Scott's mouth snapped shut. Kyle, the younger guard, stepped away from Amanda and Scott instinctively, as though not wanting to be associated with what was rapidly becoming a catastrophic moment. Linda gestured toward Camille. Ms. Harris built her career at this very bank. She worked her way up from a janitorial position to teller, then to branch management, then regional leadership, for over 4 decades. She's not only grown Summit National's profitability, but has also created our diversity and equity initiatives, the very policies you violated today. Amanda's face turned an alarming shade of red. Ms. McCarthy, she began weakly. This is all a misunderstanding. Stop. Linda held up a hand. Before you make this any worse for yourself, be aware that not only has the executive board been watching the security footage, but legal counsel is already reviewing the audio recordings and customer statements gathered by witnesses in this lobby. She turned toward Mr. Collins. Please notify Atlanta PD that any further disturbance or refusal to cooperate from staff may result in trespassing charges. Also, call HR. Termination paperwork needs to be prepared. Amanda sank into her chair. Scott gripped the counter as though afraid he might collapse. Emily Ross, tears welling in her eyes, looked at Camille. I didn't mean to, she began. Camille's expression softened slightly, but she said nothing. You will all have the opportunity to explain your actions, Linda continued. But understand this, what happened today is not an isolated incident. The executive board has been reviewing patterns of discriminatory behavior flagged in recent internal audits. This branch, in particular, has had multiple customer complaints, many dismissed or quietly buried. Amanda visibly winced. Those days are over, Linda declared. Kyle and Barnes exchanged glances. Barnes nodded solemnly, as though acknowledging a truth he had long suspected but could never confirm. At that moment, the executive elevator chimed, and 3 board members entered the lobby, 2 men and 1 woman. All dressed impeccably, they paused only briefly before joining Linda at Camille's side. We came down the moment we reviewed the footage, said Robert Lansing, chairman of the board. Ms. Harris, on behalf of Summit National Bank, I want to personally apologize for what you've endured. Camille inclined her head slightly. Thank you, Robert, but my concern is not for myself. It's for the countless other customers who have likely faced similar treatment without the means or the position to challenge it. The board members nodded gravely. That's why today's incident cannot be swept aside, Camille continued. Her voice, always steady, now carried the weight of undeniable authority. The culture that allowed this behavior to flourish must change, immediately. Robert Lansing turned to Linda. Begin implementing the response plan we discussed. Effective now. Linda tapped her tablet. Already underway. Termination proceedings for Amanda Blake and Scott Miller. HR review for additional staff involved. Full retraining protocols for the remaining team. And an independent audit of customer service practices at all branch locations. Good, Robert said. He turned to Camille. And your personal decision. Camille looked across the lobby at Amanda, now trembling, at Scott, who appeared shell-shocked. at Emily, who had begun quietly sobbing into her hands. "Amanda Blake and Scott Miller are terminated immediately," Camille declared. "Emily Ross will be placed on probation, pending completion of equity and customer service training. Her conduct today showed hesitation, not malice. There's potential for growth." The staff gasped. Even Linda's eyes widened slightly, not at the firings, but at Camille's decision to give Emily a chance. "Barnes and Kyle," Camille added, "will receive commendations. They exercised restraint and professionalism under challenging circumstances." "Thank you, ma'am," Barnes said quietly. Kyle nodded, looking both relieved and deeply humbled. The lobby remained silent. The customers recording lowered their phones slowly, sensing that they had witnessed not just a dramatic corporate reckoning, but something larger. Justice. Yes, but also leadership rooted in wisdom, not revenge. Camille turned back to the board and Linda. "Now, let's address the broader issue. We have a responsibility not just to punish wrongdoing, but to prevent it moving forward." "Agreed," Robert Lansing said firmly. Linda lifted her tablet again. "The Summit Equity Initiative will be announced today. A $60 million commitment to overhaul training, auditing, and accountability systems across the entire institution. We'll also establish a Customer Equity Advisory Board, composed of community leaders and clients, to ensure that every voice is heard. And transparency," Camille added. "Every branch will display signage stating that customers are entitled to respectful service and may report concerns directly to my office. We will publish quarterly reports on our progress." The board members nodded in agreement. Amanda and Scott, once pillars of authority in this branch, now stood diminished symbols of a system that had failed to evolve. Their power had evaporated not through angry confrontation, but through the firm, measured response of a leader who understood both justice and grace. Camille looked out across the room. "For those who doubted me today," she said, her voice unwavering, "know that wealth is not always worn on the surface. Respect cannot be demanded without being given, and leadership means standing for those who cannot always stand for themselves." There was no applause, no cheers, only silence. A silence filled not with fear, but with understanding. And, at last, change. The weight of the moment pressed upon every corner of the bank's grand lobby. Camille Harris stood poised, not as a victim seeking retribution, but as the architect of long overdue change. Her voice, calm yet resolute, had already sealed the fate of Amanda Blake and Scott Miller. Yet what followed would resonate far beyond the termination of two employees. "Effective immediately. Amanda Blake and Scott Miller are relieved of their duties," Camille repeated, her words carrying across the silent lobby. "Your actions today, and the culture you allowed to thrive under your leadership, are incompatible with the values of Summit National Bank." Amanda's mouth opened, perhaps to object, perhaps to beg for reconsideration, but no words emerged. She seemed to realize there was no argument to be made. The security footage, the customer complaints, the eyes of the executive board, the eyes of the public. There was no shield left. Scott stared at the floor, his hands limp at his sides. His earlier arrogance had dissolved completely. "Kyle, Barnes," Camille turned to the two security guards, her tone gentle but firm. "Please escort them to gather their belongings. They may leave through the rear exit to avoid further disruption." "Yes, ma'am," Barnes replied. His usual stern demeanor softened as he nodded respectfully to Camille. "Understood." Kyle looked at Amanda and Scott without a trace of malice, but with the quiet certainty of someone upholding justice. He gestured toward the staff area. "This way, please." Amanda hesitated, glancing at Emily Ross, perhaps seeking some unspoken solidarity, but Emily refused to meet her gaze. She kept her eyes fixed on the marble floor, silent tears still tracking down her cheeks, as Amanda and Scott disappeared behind the door, escorted by security. A hush lingered in the lobby. It was not the hush of fear or tension now. It was the hush that comes when change becomes undeniable, when the old ways crumble and something better stands ready to take their place. Camille turned to the staff who remained. Emily Ross, a few tellers, the assistant operations manager, who had kept to the sidelines during the earlier confrontation. "The behavior I witnessed today is unacceptable," Camille said, addressing them directly. "But I also recognize that leadership sets the tone. Some of you were following the examples set by Amanda and Scott. Whether through fear, uncertainty, or lack of training." Emily looked up, startled. "Miss Ross," Camille continued, her voice softening, "though you participated in the initial mistreatment, you showed hesitation, discomfort. That tells me you knew it was wrong." Emily's lower lip trembled. I should have spoken up. I should have stopped them." "Learning to speak up against wrongdoing is one of the hardest lessons to master," Camille replied. "But recognizing the wrong is the first step." Linda McCarthy stepped forward, nodding in agreement. "Miss, Harris and the board have agreed to place you on probation. Miss Ross, you will undergo intensive equity and customer service training. You will also mentor under a new branch leader who embodies the values this institution must uphold moving forward." Emily nodded rapidly, tears continuing to fall. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Camille allowed a faint smile to cross her face. "I believe you." Then Camille turned to the remaining staff and, more importantly, to the customers who had silently observed everything: the young black woman with her child, the elderly veteran, the postal worker, the Latina woman still recording. To every customer here today, and to those who have walked through these doors in the past, I offer my deepest apology," Camille said, her voice resonant. "Summit National Bank was built on principles of trust, respect, and fairness. We have failed to uphold those principles here, but that ends now." Linda lifted her tablet, reading from a prepared statement. "By order of the CEO and the Executive Board, Summit National Bank will immediately implement new customer equity standards. Branch managers will be evaluated not only on profitability, but on their commitment to equitable service. Anonymous customer feedback will be reviewed quarterly, disaggregated by demographics, to identify disparities," Camille added. "Every branch will display clear signage informing customers of their rights. Discrimination, whether overt or subtle, will not be tolerated. If a customer believes they have not received fair treatment, they will be provided with direct contact to my office." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some customers nodded solemnly, others recorded every word. "Additionally," Camille continued, "I will be appointing an interim branch manager immediately, someone who can rebuild trust and model the change we demand." She turned to Barnes, the elder security guard. "Mr. Barnes, would you be willing to serve as acting branch manager until a permanent replacement is found?" Barnes blinked in surprise. "Ma'am, I've never managed a branch." "You've managed integrity," Camille replied. "That's where leadership begins. You will have full support from our leadership team and the resources necessary to succeed." The customers in the lobby began to applaud softly. It wasn't raucous. It wasn't a celebration. It was quiet, respectful, and full of gratitude. Barnes nodded slowly, pride blooming in his weathered face. "I accept. Ms. Harris, thank you for the trust." Camille gave a single nod. "It's not trust you haven't already earned. Linda McCarthy closed her tablet. The Summit Equity Initiative launches today. This branch will be the first to undergo its transformation, and it will set the example for every other branch in the nation. The old order had crumbled. A new one was taking root. And Camille Harris, once a janitor cleaning these very floors. Now the leader reshaping the institution had proven not only her resilience, but her unwavering commitment to justice and dignity for all. 3 days later, Camille Harris stood behind a polished wooden podium at Summit National Bank's headquarters. Behind her, the company's deep green and gold logo gleamed beneath the bright lights. To her right stood Linda McCarthy and the board members who had witnessed the events at the downtown branch. To her left, a diverse group of employees and community leaders gathered people who represented the new vision Camille was determined to bring to life. Before her sat a sea of reporters, cameras flashing, microphones angled forward. "Good afternoon," Camille began, her voice calm but resolute. What happened earlier this week at our downtown Atlanta branch was not an isolated incident. It was the result of a culture that, for too long, tolerated bias, both subtle and overt. That ends today. The room grew quiet, save for the soft clicking of cameras. "I did not set out that morning to make headlines," she continued. "I set out to experience firsthand what many of our customers endure daily. The reality I witnessed confirmed what too many already knew, despite our mission statements and public commitments. We had not done enough to ensure fairness and respect at every level of service." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "Effective immediately, Summit National Bank is launching the Summit Equity Initiative," Camille announced. "We are committing $60 million to this comprehensive program, which will address inequity in all areas of our operations." The room stirred. Reporters leaned forward. "This initiative will include mandatory equity and bias training for all employees, from tellers to senior executives. Performance evaluations will now factor not only in profitability and customer satisfaction, but also in equitable treatment across all demographics. We will establish a customer equity advisory board composed of clients and community advocates. This board will have direct access to the CEO's office to review service disparities and recommend improvements." Behind her, Linda McCarthy nodded firmly, her tablet in hand, already working to implement the changes. "In addition, we will publish quarterly transparency reports," Camille continued. "These reports will include customer service data disaggregated by race, gender, age, and income bracket. If disparities exist, they will be acknowledged publicly and addressed. And at every branch," Camille said, "new signage will be displayed informing customers of their rights to fair and respectful service. If they believe they have been treated unjustly, they will be provided with a direct line to my office. No more barriers, no more excuses." The journalists' pens raced. Some nodded in approval. Others simply watched, absorbing the significance of the moment. "Our commitment goes beyond policy," Camille added. "It's about changing hearts and minds, about reminding every employee that behind every account number is a person with a story that deserves respect, not suspicion." Her gaze swept the room. "I am not standing here today because I avoided discrimination throughout my career. I am standing here because I faced it and chose to transform it into progress." The crowd sat silent, moved. "Let me be clear," Camille concluded. "This is not about public relations. It is not about damage control. This is about setting a standard not just for Summit National Bank, but for the entire industry. We will lead not only in profit but in principle." As Camille stepped back from the podium, the applause began soft at first, then rising into a standing ovation. It was not the sound of celebration alone. It was the sound of accountability, of change, of a promise finally kept. If this story spoke to you, Please like the video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe for more stories that remind us why dignity and respect matter. Together, our voices can make a difference.